Little bit of everything for you on Down the Road today. We're going to get a chance to visit with Bill Werner. The teachers in Minnesota said, no, unless we get some money, we're not going to do this. And so, there was a lot of discussion about what happens in the classroom, whether or not there's enough teachers to teach. And we're going to get a chance to visit with how that got settled, and now everybody's back in the classroom with Bill Werner with the Minnesota News Network. Becky Nelson's going to join us. Same thing with nursing and nurses, the public affairs, how that's working. And so on the Minnesota side, the nurses, same thing. People are getting frustrated. And part of it, I think, is a big part of it is the fact that workers realize they're in a position of strength right now. And I think that's going to matter a lot. But the big news, or some of the big news, there's so much big news when you're sitting there looking at a war in Ukraine. But this is part of that war in Ukraine, or at least you could make that argument. President Biden announcing that he's going to release $1 million worth of the oil reserves in the nation and try to bring down those gasoline prices. Well, David Blackmon is an expert when it comes to this, the oil and gas industry. And he's an independent energy analyst, consultant based out of Texas. Gee, you think that's an oil state? He contributes to Forbes. And let's bring him in. David, good to have you coming down the road with us.
Thank you, Joel. I appreciate you having me.
I think we have to start here, David. We have to begin with the reserve itself, the Strategic Petroleum Oil Reserve. I think that people assume that there's tanks out there, what is the oil reserve, David?
Well, it's a series of underground caverns, large, mainly salt caverns that, are watertight and that the federal government has used to store a lot of crude oil in since the reserve was created in 1973 by a Democratic Congress and a Republican President, Richard Nixon, in response to the first Arab oil embargo. And that was the first time gas prices had really, shot up very substantially in the modern era. And it kind of gave a shock to the national system here. And the government said, hey, for times of a national emergency, it would be good to have a big stockpile of oil available for our country to tap. And so they created it. And, I guess President Biden thinks $4 gasoline prices are a national emergency now.
Well, and that was the purpose of it, which was, we're shut down, we can't move, we're waiting long lines at the pump, or we're in a situation where from a national defense side, we need it. We need it for many other ways. It wasn't meant to control the price at the pump. So the big question is, can it? Can it reduce the price that I'm paying for when it comes to the pump per gallon of gas?
It can. In a vacuum, you would think it could. 1 million barrels per day going onto the market in a market that's been undersupplied pretty constantly for 6 months now, and it's probably 2 or 3 million barrels per day undersupplied. It's 100 million barrel a day global market. So you're talking about adding 1% to it of supply. And so it could slow the rise of oil prices. I think the underpinning dynamics in the oil market are going to continue to be for rising oil prices and gasoline prices. But I think what this extra million a day for 6 months could do is slow the rise. The president yesterday said it's going to reduce prices 10 to 35 cents. I think that's a very problematic assumption.
Yeah. Many people afterwards saying that was pretty aggressive, the statement of it. I want to give you just a little background on myself, David. Before I ever got into, I ended up being a state senator while I was running a utility. And that utility was a rural water system. And in that system, North Dakota is so flat, so everything is built with reservoirs that you pump out of, not water towers, because we couldn't gain anything by gravity. Under that, we had reservoirs of water. Now, I realize this is a long way to get to a comparison, but during spray season in North Dakota, when farmers were requiring a lot of water to put fertilizer and whatnot on their crops, our reservoirs would run down. That wasn't good. That wasn't good.
Right.
Is this not good? It would seem to me you only have so much oil in these reserves, or am I wrong, David?
No, you're absolutely right. You hit on the key point that I'm concerned about from an energy security perspective. President Biden, when he became president, he inherited about 635 million barrels of oil in the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which is enough to supply our whole country for about 21 days. Okay, so it's just that much, and he ordered the withdrawal of 50 million barrels back in November. That had no impact on gasoline prices, and now he's going to take another 180 million out. And so when you combine those two, you're talking about 40% of the total reserve now gone. And well, the administration says, well, we're just kind of loaning it to the market. And after we've done this, we'll at some point in the future buy purchase crude to put back into the reserve to replace it. Well, in the meantime, we've got 6 months here where we're going to be we're going to reducing our national security, which is what energy security is, at a time when Putin's at war in the Ukraine and threatening to use nuclear missiles. And there's these constant impulses, I think, over in Europe and even within our own government to get the United States involved in that war. So this is a very risky move by the president. And it's not risky, just for him politically, but for our country's national security. And I think it's a very wrong-headed thing to do.
I couldn't agree more. And I'm a Democrat. And so, is it about perception? Is it about the oil industry itself, or the people of America, quite frankly, seeing that the Biden administration is attempting to do something about it?
Well, I think that's a big motivating factor. And, I know that there's this political impulse to always want to do something when the problem arises, right? And it's not a Democratic impulse exclusively, it's a Republican impulse too. And I think that by and large, when you're talking about the oil markets, which are, always unpredictable, it's a bad impulse. And there's very few levers any president can pull to try to influence gasoline prices and control the price of oil on a global market. And this is just, I understand the political motivations behind it, but I think that's politics is the wrong reason to use the SPR.
David, there was a time, and I want to say at 60 years old, it wasn't that long ago. Of course, it's all relative, right? For my daughters, right. It might have been a long time ago, but there was a time in recent history that I was paying $3.80 for gas per gallon. Now in North Dakota, we haven't reached $4 per gallon because we're an oil-producing state, and for a lot of different reasons. But I was used to it. I didn't like it, but I was used to it. And you know what? The next day, I still had milk in the fridge and bread in the drawer, right. And garbage bags to throw things away with. And so, I guess my point is this. Right now, America doesn't like gas prices. And it's easy to see at the pump. But we're still living. It isn't devastating. And right. So is this something that, in your opinion, we should just be riding out and enjoy lower prices another day?
Well, I think we should be riding it out. Yes, I do. I think that there are things the government could do to increase the pace of permitting and, kind of open up the ability for the oil industry to increase U.S. production here at home. And I mean, it's, again, just like trying to control the price of gasoline. It's limited to what the government can do. But there are things you could do to try to speed up the domestic oil production here at home. But in terms of trying to control the price of oil on a global market, it's just kind of I don't think there's much chance of success here, and I wish we would not do it, frankly.
It wasn't that long ago, because of our oil patch in the Bakken, and what we've done in North Dakota because of fracking, that we saw a huge success, a huge boom. The communities that are watching you right now built hotels. We had people sleeping in man camps. You know the scenario from where you're at. But you look at it, and when the price per barrel of oil got down into that $30 mark, everything went in hold. Everything was like, look, fracking costs too much. We can't do this. They have the permits, but they didn't develop the wells. And the oil industry right now is at record profits, pushing to be able to drill on public lands. And of course, they are drilling on public lands now, but develop new permits on public lands. I guess what I'm building up to here, David, is this a political tool on their side? Because here in North Dakota, they've got permits they could be developing. They've got wells they capped that still produce. And what they desperately want is to get permits on public lands. And so they're at record profits. Is the oil industry to blame here?
Yeah, I do think it's politics on both sides to some extent, particularly in the upstream part of the business with the drillers and the producers. Where the Biden administration is really holding up the industry, frankly, is in the midstream with pipeline projects and other critical infrastructure that needs to be built. Any pipeline that goes across a state line has to have a permit from the FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, to build that pipe. And it hasn't been so much, I think, in your part of the world or in Texas, but in the Northeast in particular, there have been several very much needed pipeline projects that could supply natural gas very cheaply to the New England states and to the southeastern part of the United States that the FERC has refused to permit and been held up in other ways. And if we want, for example, our LNG industry to quadruple its exports to Europe in the next 8 years, that's going to require a massive increase of infrastructure for the LNG industry, and all of it's going to require federal permits. And so I do think that it's overblown in the upstream side of the business, but not as you move downstream.
Well, and I'll back you on that because living here in the heart of oil country, the Keystone Pipeline is just a figurehead. That was Canadian tar sand oil coming down that didn't help us as much as everywhere else. But pipelines are the safest, most efficient way to move the product. And so, this whole notion that we're just going to eliminate oil and this will force, what we want to have a more green world, we're not ready for that yet. And so I don't know how we get to the administration to make that point when the other individuals that elected this administration are the ones that are beating the drum and having the power behind. I don't.
Yeah, and of course your state ends up with all the trains carrying oil from Canada into the United States and all the 18-wheelers. And I love truckers and I love the railroad industry, but it's not as safe and it's not as clean a way to move oil as a pipeline is. And you're absolutely right, everything you said there.
David, I could do this all day. Number one, I know a little bit about the subject, but I really like the fact that you do know it. I know a little bit to be dangerous. You know this.
You know plenty. Yeah.
David, good to visit with you. Thanks for taking the time with us today.